I don't wear my pulpit robe very often these days. Maybe you haven't been wearing yours very much either. When I put it on for something like the church anniversary at which I preached a few weeks ago, I usually stick my hand into my pocket and discover treasures in there. It's like putting your hand into the pocket of a coat you haven't worn since last year. So I find a tissue, always have a tissue there, and I find a cough drop, and I find this little glass pebble in my robe pocket. This is something that I've used, especially when I was a pastor, often on the first Sunday of the year when we remember our baptismal vows. Often have these in a bowl of water for people to take one out and keep with them all year so that they can reach into their pocket or their purse at any time and remember this as if it were a little drop of water to remind them of their baptism. At one of the churches that I served, I heard two really good stories about the way this little pebble impacted people's lives. In one of them, there was the elder that I've had communion with more times than anyone else in the whole world because he and I would take communion to the shut-ins regularly from this church. He told me one time that he was in a store and he was paying with cash, and he took his change out of his pocket, kind of spread it out in his hand so that he could see what was there, and he had this little pebble in with his change. The young woman at the Farm King said to him, "What is that?" And it gave him the occasion to say, "Oh, well, my pastor gave me that. It's just to remind me about my baptism." And she said, "Oh, well, tell me more about that." It gave him the opportunity to talk about how important his faith was to him. And then in that same church, there was another story about this little pebble. A man who worked at one of the manufacturing plants had it in his pocket, always carried it in his pocket. There was, at that time, at least kind of an Olympics among the manufacturing plants in that small city. They would meet on some weekend in September or something and have all of these events, and there was a trophy that went around to the places that won each time. It was a big deal to these manufacturing plants. Well, his team had won, and the thing that put them over the top was the tug of war. There was some way of figuring out if the teams were even by adding together the weights of the people on either end of the rope. On Monday or Tuesday morning, when this man was kind of tidying up from this competition over the weekend, he noticed that he had added the weights of his team incorrectly, that they actually should have lost the tug of war that got them the trophy. It was very important to his employer that they won this. It was a big deal for all of them. And so he had to think a little bit about what he had to do. He told me that he got up and walked around his office for a minute and put his hand in his pocket. There he realized that he had this little glass pebble there, and he knew what he needed to do as he was reminded of who and whose he is. He admitted the mistake. The trophy actually ended up going to the other team. Sometimes we don't need any kind of concrete reminders to have us think about what our faith means to us. But every once in a while, it's nice to have a little something that we can hold on to, that can remind us from time to time that what we are called to do as Christians is to bring hope in the name of Jesus wherever we find ourselves.